I looked the sales reps directly in the face and said, if we're going to only compete on price, then I can just hire a bunch of flying monkeys to sell this product. Welcome to Executive Evolution. I have over 25 years of leadership experience in corporate America. I learned a lot of lessons the hard way, and I created this podcast so that you won't have to. That was not one of my finest moments. It was a stressful time in our business. We were under a lot of pressure to deliver on margins. We were under a lot of pressure to deliver on volume. And we were dealing with a lot of price pressure in the marketplace. Small price pressure, but it was enough. We had a very unsophisticated customer base. And I was frustrated because I was in between sales reps who I empathized with, who I agreed with to an extent, and senior leaders who were pushing that we had to grow this business at that price and would not budge. It was a real struggle for me. And rather than admitting that struggle to my team, I took it out on them. And I came up with that I could hire flying monkeys quote. It was not one of my greatest moments as a leader, and one that I think about a lot when I'm talking about what great leadership is. And I just always envision my team listening to these podcasts going, what does he really think? I remember when he called us a bunch of flying monkeys. We always make mistakes as leaders, and knowing those mistakes, building that self-awareness is what's really important. And that is just one of the many topics that I talk about on this week's episode with Kyle McDowell. Kyle is a former Fortune 10 executive. He's a speaker. He's a leadership coach, and he is the author of Begin with We, a great book about key leadership principles that he himself developed. And he's going to tell that story in this episode. So let's jump right in to this week's episode of Executive Evolution with Kyle McDowell. Kyle, welcome to the Executive Evolution podcast. I'm really excited to have you on today and talk about what's going on with you.
Hey, Craig, man, it is really an honor to be with you today. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you've got such a great career, and I love how you've pivoted, like I did, kind of a corporate career into actually helping a lot more people, doing something for people instead of doing something for a business. So as we dive into this, I'm really excited to hear about your journey through your career and into the book and into the business that you've built. Has it been everything you've hoped it would be making that transition?
It was incredibly, and still is incredibly difficult. I grew up in corporate America. I began my journey in that world. I just turned 18. And when I stepped away from the corporate landscape to start my own firm, this is around the time I wrote my book, was 28 years later. So going from leading tens of thousands of people with an army of kind of people around you to help get things done, to help attack whatever the issue is that we're trying to get after, is a very different paradigm than being a solopreneur. I have a team of 4 now, whereas in the past, as I mentioned, several thousand. It's a very difficult transition. For me, the pull or the magnet that has kept me moving forward is the impact that I see that the book is having, that my keynotes are having, and that just fuels me to keep going.
When I made a similar transition, it is kind of humbling, one, to go to doing it all yourself. But it was really, I spent so much of my career helping people grow in their careers, but for a company. And I realized I can actually do this in a way that's helping people grow for themselves and really start helping lift people up, because there's just so much opportunity out there to do that right now.
There's no better feeling in the world. There's just not, from lifting someone else up, especially if you can see the path that they're on has some type of similarity or overlap to the path that you've been on, the mistakes you made, the lessons you learned, the trials that you went through. If you can help someone before they're able to experience some of that, or at least give them some guidance, there's no better feeling in the world in my mind.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's very fulfilling. So here's to success.
Amen.
So we'll keep going. Well, hey, Kyle, we always like to open this up with the lightning round. Are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it. Let's roll.
All right. So barring your own book, what is the best leadership book you have ever read?
Without question for me, man, it is From Values to Action by a fellow named Harry Kramer. Harry is the former chairman and CEO of Baxter International, multi-billion-dollar healthcare firm. And I happened to cross paths with him when I went to business school. He's a professor of mine. He's my leadership crush. I mean, to be honest with you. And he was the guy that taught me, and his book goes so much more in depth into this, but on the surface, his book taught me you can be human, and still be a great and impactful leader. You don't have to be a robot. You don't have to have the fanciest shirt, shoes, this expansive vocabulary. that there is tremendous value in being just a normal dude. And I just have a ton of respect for him.
I remember early on in my career, so much trying to see who is that successful leader who still has, a strong family intact. He's a successful leader. He's not a jerk, right? He's actually earnestly interested in both the business success and your success. And sometimes that was a hard thing to find as a junior executive, to really find those people out there.
Well, I don't know about you, and I would love to hear your perspective on this. I would say the most important lessons that I was able to learn throughout that 28-year period came from leaders that I did not want to be like. I did not want to emulate. They were responsible in many, many cases for me feeling less than adequate, less than capable, and inferior in many ways. I didn't want others to feel the way that I felt as a result of someone else, quote unquote, leading them. So my biggest lessons throughout that entire career, for my entire career, almost all come from examples that I didn't want to replicate.
That becomes a lot of fodder for my writing and my teaching, is the people who really were the bad examples. You can get there that way, but you don't have to, right? We can do it. My favorite story is a guy who was higher up on the food chain than me and would look at us and say, I don't talk to you. I talk to your boss. You talk to my people.
Wait, what? Somebody would literally say that to you?
Oh, literally looked me in the eye and told me that. Yeah. And just said, you don't work up through me. So I said, okay, great. Fast forward several years as the industry we were in went through several layoffs. He calls me because he's networking to find something. I still happen to have a role at that point. And I pick up and I talk to him and he goes, thanks for taking my call. I've really had a hard time getting a hold of people. I was like, he really still doesn't get it. I wasn't even surprised.
How hard, Craig, did you have to fight to say, well, I don't talk to you. I only talk to your leader? Like there had to be some karma in the back of your mind saying, wow, boy, this feels ironic.
There was, but I tell you what, the karma was being nice, right? The karma was treating him like a human being and saying, I know he knows how he treated me. I know how he treated me. But by me coming at it that way, that's fine. And he really had no clue why no one was calling him back. And I'm like, I can tell you.
But I think that points to something that I've heard you talk about more than once, and that is the ability to be self-reflective as a leader. To go inside, how am I treating people? Am I making good on my commitments? Am I someone that can be trusted? Am I someone that can be relied upon? And it sounds like this fella certainly didn't have those moments of introspection. And by the way, to loop back to the question that you asked about a favorite leadership book, From Values to Action, Kramer talks about his 4 values that are really, absolutely essential requirements to be a great leader. And one of them is self-reflection. And I just think that is a superpower. If you can find, I call it the mirror of truth. If you can have either a confidant who will tell it to you like it really is, not what you want to hear, is one angle. Or another angle is if you're able to set your ego aside and have a real conversation with yourself about what it is that you're putting out into the team, what it is that you're putting out into the world, and is it aligned with who you want to be perceived at, maybe from a leadership legacy perspective or just from a human legacy. Am I doing things that would make me proud when I look back at the end of this career?
That's really the key, right? Is when I'm sitting down at the end of my career, am I going to think back to, how did I impact people? That's a true piece of leadership. But the interesting thing was that guy, when it was going on, was seen as a huge, well-performing leader because he was everyone was afraid of him.
What a shame.
But he was feted at the organization. It's tough.
There was a point in my career when I really had this epiphany that it was a monumental transformation in how I led. I was that guy. I banged my fist on the desk. I raised my voice. Why? Because that was the example I had been given throughout my career. And I'd seen very successful executives be that person, barking, screaming, threats, all those things. And there was a point at which I had to just press pause. I stepped away from the corporate world. I left for I wanted it to be a couple of months. It ended up being a couple of weeks because I got a role that was really exciting. But during that little transition, I wanted to reach out and connect with people who I felt had a lot of respect for me as a leader. We'd worked together. And it turned out I didn't have a lot of respect. I was feared. It was something that I did not realize until people were open enough. And this is well after we had any type of reporting relationship. They would be open to say, dude, you kind of alienated me. Or I had examples given to me of specific meetings, of course, that I didn't remember at all, but I handled in a way that left them feeling less than adequate. Years later, they're still bringing this stuff up, which is powerful in a way. It helps me turn the page and be a better leader, be a better person, but also a bit embarrassing when I look back at maybe how I handled some of those situations.
I have a few greatest worst hits that haunt me when I think back, especially when I'm sitting here talking about this stuff, saying, oh, this is great leadership and all this kind of stuff. And in the back of my head, I can think of everyone who ever worked for me queuing in. Remember that time he told us he could get flying monkeys to sell this product at that price? I remember that, Craig, really well.
Did you really say that?
I really did. And you know what they did? They bought me a flying monkey that they shotgunned into my office one day.
I think, does that not speak to the relationship you had? That seems like... Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You made a mistake.
It was not a great day. It was a mistake.
No.
But it haunts me to this day that I said that. You know, it was like, that's not who I wanted to be. But I remember so strongly that that's who I was on that day. Most of the time, I really did try to be the leader with empathy, the leader who was trying to learn from the team to help the team grow and all those kinds of good things. But that was just one day when it was just a bad week and we were under a lot of pressure to grow at a margin. That's kind of the tough part, right? You've got the rules from up here when you're in a corporate environment, right? They're saying go, and we've got to have these margins and this volume and all those kinds of things. But then you also know your team is like, that's a pretty heavy lift to get to. How do you tear that piece between trying to keep them motivated, but also trying to manage expectations? Because we're all trying to hit whatever this quarterly number is when you're in a big corporate environment.
I was with 3 Fortune 10 companies throughout my career, and there was never a time where anyone would say, never mind the targets that we've set, just give a great experience to those we serve, or make sure the product or service we sell is excellent. The priority was always set, which, at times would be frustrating to me. But I learned over time, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, throughout my career, as I became more comfortable in my own shoes. I've heard you touch on this as well. To this day, man, I still suffer from imposter syndrome from time to time.
Yeah.
I certainly suffered from it at nauseum throughout really long stretches of my career. So when the transition or my ability at some point to turn those demands that were delivered from on high, somewhere in the ivory tower, said, okay, here's your new target or here's your new goal, go deliver this. I learned to turn those from stressful situation to galvanizing events. So what does that mean? In the past, I would just call a meeting, get the team together and say, here's the new target. We're going to hit this or else, let's go. Transitioning from that to here's the target, and boy, is it a big one. And I got to be honest, guys, I'm not quite sure how we're going to get there. But if there's a team that I want to be associated with to get there, it's this team. And we may not get there, but it will not be for a lack of effort. It won't be for us helping each other out, picking each other up, challenging each other to be better. So I like to turn those kind of stressful things into, all right, cool. This is this is what we have in front of us. And one of my principles is we embrace challenge. So when that comes, turning people around from, gosh, this seems unfair. And by the way, when the leader pretends that there's not a real risk in front of us, or there's nothing troubling or a giant hill to climb, there's no relatability, no trust. The people on the team are like, this guy just doesn't get it. He's a robot. And I think that is not a sustainable relationship. But in turn, on the contrary, when I say, hey, we're going to lock arms and we're going to do our damnedest to hit this target, and then wherever the chips fall, we'll rally from there. But just know that we're all in it together. I think that is how you establish trust with those you lead.
When I hear you say that, and you talked about that pivot between the two examples, right? The real thing that's different is you're talking about we, right? It's not you all are going to go do this, right? We are all going to do it. And it's a heavy lift for all of us. And we've got to find a way. But you know what? I'm going to be right there with you. And that's what they need to hear, I think. And I think it's helpful when you're genuinely saying as a leader, look, we're all in this together, sink or swim. I'm not saying this is a cakewalk. But what I am saying is we're going to fight hard, and I'm going to get you what you need. Because to me, so much of our role as leaders is we got to get the stuff out of the way so they can perform, right?
Preach. Craig, I say this, I put it this way, and sometimes I get some eye rolls. I think leaders have 2 responsibilities. That's it. Just 2 responsibilities. The first is to get all the noise out of the way. The things that stand in the way of our teams delivering excellence, whatever those are, it could be as benign as like, we don't have accurate enough reporting to make decisions, or our work schedules are not conducive to the type of candidate that we hire, the profile. It can be any spectrum of things. But it's my job to get as many of those out of the system out of the way of my team. And then my second responsibility is to inspire and motivate in spite of those things that I couldn't remove. It's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't be called work if I was able to get everything out of the way. So it's naive to think that that should even be a goal. But once I have had that feedback loop from my team, the things that are standing in the way from us being excellent, it's my job to get those out of the way. It's my job. And if I can't, I need to be open and honest with the team and say, man, I tried like hell, but for whatever the reason, and be open and transparent about it. Okay, but this is what's left. Now let's lock arms. Let's go. So I think those are the two roles that's all we have to do. It's not easy, by the way, but that is all we have to do.
I think a lot of leaders end up putting more barriers up, right?
Yeah.
Well, I've got to get this more reporting. You've got to give me this. And I've done it too, right? We've got to do these things. And you start creating structures that aren't actually growing the business. They're just growing data or growing information or growing control or whatever it is you're trying to do, right? And so you start creating the wrong things, because I don't think we do a great job when we develop young leaders to help them see that these are the things you have to do. And they see themselves more as managers. But I'd be interested, because you came up through that system. What was your experience as a first leader? What kind of support systems did you find when you were kind of said, when they pointed the finger at you and said, Kyle, you're promoted, go?
My first reaction was, me? Are you sure? As I mentioned, imposter syndrome was a real thing for me. But I found, man, I had an interesting kind of beginning at this. I found myself leading about 600 people at the age of 25. And in hindsight, looking back, it's like, who in the world would have given me that responsibility? It occurred to me very early on, although I didn't spend a lot of energy trying to address it, but it did occur to me very, very early on. This is probably something that's more widespread than anybody would be proud to admit. And that is, most organizations, we do a really great job saying, hey, welcome to the team. This is your list of responsibilities. Here are your SOPs, your policies and procedures. We do a great job, by and large, for the most part. We do a great job instructing and educating and lifting up team members to do the job, the X's and O's, right? Most organizations do a terrible job teaching people how to lead. We take someone who was reasonably successful or even wildly successful in their role as an individual contributor. We promote them into a position of authority. Now, I won't say leadership, but a position of authority. They stumble. They have all kinds of issues with their team. The results aren't what we expected. And then the person or group of people that hired this person look at each other and say, well, what happened? Clearly, he can't cut it. This isn't the right person. But we didn't do anything. We just expected him or her to become a fantastic leader on day one, and it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. We tell them all the rules, right? Here's how to hire, here's how to fire, here's to do this, here's to do that. But the mentoring, the leadership training, the things we've been talking about, the connection, right? As you think about like that part of your experience and you think about your book, how much of some of your lessons, the 10 lessons in your book, comes directly from that piece of your experience?
100%. 100% of the book. And if you'll allow me, maybe just a bit of context for your audience. I stepped away from the corporate world. This is back in around maybe 2017. And at that point, I had led thousands of people. The role that I had left just prior to stepping away had a team of probably 3,500 people. And I stepped away because my apathy had reached such a boiling point that I really started to question everything, the whole corporate machine. Everybody was drinking the corporate Kool-Aid, but nobody wanted to admit it and talk about it. We weren't transparent about our actual feelings of what's going on. Everybody kept their head down and we just shuffled through the day. I just came to this point where, man, I realized this is soul sucking. This is not the recipe for a life well lived or a life fulfilled. So I stepped away. I ended up taking a role just a number of weeks later. It was not a secret that there was a cultural transformation in need. By the way, it was to lead an organization of about 15,000 people. The hiring manager, the fellow I ended up reporting to, was pretty outspoken that there are a lot of opportunities from a leadership perspective. So I took the role. I'm in this position for maybe 60 days at the time. Of course, I've gotten to know my directs, but I really didn't know many people beyond that. And I needed to understand the temperature, like what's happening. I know I got this group of 7 or 8 directs and I know what they're telling me, but is that reality? So I called the top 50 or 60 leaders of my organization into a meeting. We all flew into Lawrence, Kansas. And I viewed that meeting as our jumping off point. It was my opportunity to get in front of this team and say, here's who we are. Here are the types of things I want us to be known for. Here's how we treat one another first. That was the primary objective, was like, here's how we're going to treat one another, not our clients. I'm not even worried about that yet, but how we treat each other behind the scenes has such a direct impact on how we treat our clients. So let's start there. And Craig, the night before I was going to meet with these leaders, I'm in my hotel room and I was terrified. I didn't know what I was going to say other than, hey, this is a new beginning, maybe share a little bit about myself. But I had this epiphany that evening. And the epiphany was, if you want the same results, and if you want to feel the same level of apathy and disengagement, frustration, the soul sucking I talked about, you know what to do. Just do the same thing. That's easy. Just do the same thing. But if you want a different experience, different outcome, a higher sense of fulfillment, and you actually want to connect with those that you lead, I had to do something different. So that night, I had my laptop in my lap. I'm working on a PowerPoint. So the thought process went like this. What are the things that have driven you nuts over the last 2 decades that now you're in a position with this massive team to do differently? Be the leader you never had. Lead in a way that you never led. What are those things? First thing pops in my mind was, man, I've seen so many leaders just do the wrong thing. Do things that were at best sketchy, at worst unethical. Boom, I have my first principle. We do the right thing, always. And I continued, it was probably a 2 or 3 hour, I started around midnight because we had a dinner that evening. I finished around 2, 3 in the morning. And I was left with 10 sentences. And those 10 sentences did, and they still do, begin with the word we. And I wasn't super creative then, not super creative now. I had the 10 we's. And each one of those principles were born out of my frustration or the things that I'd witnessed throughout my career that stood in the way of us achieving excellence as a team, not as an individual. So every one of those things in the book, man, those concepts, all 10 we's, the principles, they are all born out of, not we should do this. They're born out of, I've seen it done the opposite or not done at all. And this is how we're going to go forward.
And as you talked through that with these 50 or 60 people who probably some were cynical, some were jaundiced, some said, well, here we go. A lot of times I talk to people that they lay this stuff out and then they think everybody gets it. So what was the first reaction? And then how did you keep it going?
What happens too often is a leader or a person in a position of authority, they get a coach or they read a book or they go to a seminar and they come back to the office and they say, here's who we are. This is the change we're making. And it lasts about a week. I would not put myself in a position that my principles were just hollow words on a wall. So when I shared those 10 principles, I would say half the room was really energized and optimistic. I could see it on their faces. I would say a quarter of the room was skeptical, but open-minded. And then there was a group that was downright, this guy's full of it. This guy, we've seen this guy in his starch shirt and his shiny shoe. Like, we know this routine. We know this movie ends. By the way, my direct reports combined had a tenure of about 12 years in their roles. So they had already forgotten more about their roles than I ever had known at that point. So it was important for me to establish these principles of who we are, how we will behave. But I knew I couldn't force it. I couldn't make it be, right? So I intentionally shared those principles and I said, guys, make no mistake, I will hold you accountable to these. I will hold you accountable to them, but I expect you to do the same to me. I literally said, I want you to grab me by the ear if you see me behaving in a way contrary to any one of these 10 principles. And then I stepped back. One of the fellas in the room asked for my PowerPoint that evening. And he framed it in a way that was like really exciting. He wanted to share it with his team because he wanted to kind of evangelize these principles. He later admitted to me that he only wanted the PowerPoint to check the properties under file to see if I actually created the document or if it was something that I lifted or plagiarized from somewhere else. So the skepticism was very, very high. And as a matter of fact, it was probably a year plus later before I genuinely believed that the principles, the 10 we's, were having an impact. I finally grabbed a woman for whom I have a tremendous amount of respect. She was a direct report of mine, Lori. And I said, Lori, is this working? Is it happening? And she gave me all the happy answers. And I said, don't brown nose me. Tell me the truth. I need to know, is this really working? Are we on to something? And she said, damn it. She got so irate. She's like, damn it, they are working. We have to continue this. And from there, I would show up at any one of my offices. I had 11 locations. I would see signage. I had 10 We's signs, 10 We's puzzles. Coffee mugs were coming out. The team put together these bracelets that I still wear. This is 7 years later. And I started to see it taking hold. So much so, man, the icing on the cake was when, without my guidance or direction, my team came to me and said, we want to put the 10 We's in our performance appraisals. This is how we want to hold people accountable to being this team member. It was a long, long journey. And I'll tell you, brother, even now with the book being a Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller, there are pockets of time where I'm like, is this really working? Is it resonating? And then I'll get a DM from a reader, or I'll get an email from somebody that's like, hey, you've changed how I view leadership. You've changed my team. You've changed how I'm raising my children, is a comment I've gotten more than once. So those are the things that kind of fuel me when I have those moments of imposter syndrome or doubt.
Here you are, you've got all this experience, and that darn imposter syndrome will still show up.
And I'm convinced that those who deny that it exists or say they don't suffer from it or have never suffered from it, they're just being dishonest. They're just being dishonest. I just don't know how else to say it. Now, certainly over time, people become much more comfortable, maybe with the experience that I've had, and especially now with the book and other things. Maybe you could argue that it's silly and unfounded that I feel that way occasionally. And certainly I'm guessing there are people that really come to the point where it's not an issue for them any longer. I'm not that person. I still struggle with it. And I'm open about it because nobody has it figured out. And when you put that into the universe as if I do have it all figured out, I'm all knowing, I'm on this perfection pedestal, your team doesn't trust you because you can't be perfect. They fear you, as we just talked about a moment or two ago. It was an eye-opening, awakening experience for me to transition from this only focusing on me and caring about the impact that I could have to transitioning all my energy, care, time, and investment of energy into my team. It just took a while to get there.
And for you, as you're looking at, say, the leader who's been kind of on the other path, an experienced leader, they've had some success, but they haven't really built into a we culture in their business and followed your principles or even think to. What can they do to kind of change? Because, hey, I'm 25 years into this career. If I start acting differently, I know what's going to happen. They're all just going to check their watches and wait for me to go back to how I was. Mm-hmm. How do you help them kind of move into this different paradigm?
It's no different than dieting or exercise or any number of things in our existence that we know it's going to be hard, but at the end of this hard, I'll be better off. The 10 We's in my approach to leadership are incredibly simple, but simple doesn't mean easy. We know if we want to lose weight, we got to burn more calories than we take in. Then why is more than 50% of our country obese? If it's that easy, if it's that simple, I should say, then everybody should be in great shape. So when I'm either working with a team, and that's probably where I get most of my energy, is from working with an entire leadership team at one time. And I'm really frank about this. I'll give you a better example. I get this question, okay, Kyle, you've worked with us for a number of weeks now. When should we start to see this take hold deeper in the organization? And my answer is the same every time. I don't know. How committed are you to leading in a way that we is an irrefutable component of our cultural DNA? How much are you willing to give for that? And by the give, I mean, put your ego aside. Find the empathy that you maybe not have led with throughout the bulk of your leadership journey. Genuinely care about those you lead. I'm not saying you got to be soft and mushy and go have beers with everybody 3-4 nights a week, but you have to be relatable. I think it's relatability plus authenticity equals trust. And if I can be relatable to my team and I'm authentically who I am, they know I'm not trying to be something I'm not. I think trust naturally follows.
I even saw that in my own career when I finally was willing to be who I was in front of everybody. It was just not like I had some deep, dark secrets, right? But, I'm a huge comic book nerd. Up until recently, I had like 11,000 comic books laying around the house. But I didn't tell anybody, right? That was like this whole area that was closed off because I didn't want to, I needed to be business guy. And finally, I released all that. It kind of takes that veil down because we put these, I think even our teams put these things in front of us, right? That, that must be this hugely important person. Craig didn't get here or Kyle didn't get here if he really wasn't an ace businessman. And on the other side of that veil, you're sitting back there going, I don't know how I'm still in this job. I don't know how the heck they haven't found me out yet, right? And so you have this weird dichotomy between expectations. And when you finally just kind of say, you know what, guys, I don't have every answer, but I believe in the team. I believe in us, and I believe we're going to find a way. And by the way, you're going to help me come up with the answers. Now everyone's like, okay, well, he's just driving, but we're all in this together, and we're all going to start moving it forward.
Was there an event that helped you make that transition to, like, Why? How did you wake up one day and know it was the right thing to share about your comic book collection? Like, what happened to make that change?
We had gone through this really crazy corporate hostile insourcing outsourcing event, taken my team through tremendous amounts of stress. And it was all remote, right? I had 100 people all over the country. We pulled them all together at Universal Studios, Universal Studios down in Florida, where they have the Marvel Superhero Island is one of the things. And I was just like, these guys need to decompress. We need to be a little less serious, but still talk about it. And I just did this whole thing where I used superheroes as paradigms or to represent the ideals that we wanted to face, and showed a ridiculously deep knowledge of superheroes. And I just kind of put it out there. And the funny part was, when I planned to do this speech, I had no idea that the two senior execs from JP Morgan Chase that had taken us through this, who I suddenly became a Chase employee, and as my team did, two big senior execs were going to be in the room at the same time. And let me tell you, I was prepared to do that in front of my team. I was not prepared to do that in front of senior execs from New York City who didn't know me very well. But then it was out, right? I was out there. What are you going to do? And it was just, and I think that kind of started to change a little of my dynamic of being willing to do it. I'm not telling them everything that's going on in my life, but it's like, this is who I am, right? This is kind of where I'm coming from. So it was an interesting thing.
That story reminds me of two really, I think, important things. For all of those in some type of position of authority, you notice I say that more than I say leader. Sometimes I say leader, sometimes I say boss. Obviously, they're not the same thing. So anyone in a position of authority, just inherently to feel as if you can present something to your team in a particular way that's not okay to present to someone more senior than you is a problem. It's a problem, right? You're not unique in that. I'm sure I've done it. I'm sure we've all done it, especially if your team's in the room, because they see you behaving in a way that is different than how you behave when it's just us and the team. So inherently there's a problem where our organizations affect, or rather encourage us, either subliminally or directly, to behave in a way that is different depending on which audience is in the room. That's not authentic, and that's hard to follow. That's really hard for others to follow. That's my first response to that. Or my second thought was, if you're inconsistent in how you approach the team, whether it is, I'm speaking with these fancy words and I want to portray this sense of I've got it all, the sense of, like I said, this perfection pedestal, your team sees that. The things that you're not good at, they see that. You don't have to tell them, which the more you shy away from that and act as if it's not a gap or an opportunity for you, the more they distrust you because they see you putting on this facade. So I think it's a really important thing to call out, and that is being your authentic self. That's how you get the best results. I'm not naive, man. Every organization won't embrace that, nor do they encourage it. I've been there. And I would just say to those in your audience that are in that situation, you have to have this mirror of truth conversation. It's like, am I okay being something or someone that I'm not for this paycheck? And if the answer is yes, respect. I get it, man. We've got commitments. We've got things we have to deliver on. It's called work. I get it. We have to do that. But if you're open to a better way, finding more fulfillment and actually having an impact that outlasts your tenure, that years from now, someone looks back and say, man, I'm so grateful for having worked with Craig because he put me in a position to do things I didn't know I could do. He helped me get where I am today. If you're open to that potential, and that might involve taking a step or two backwards to go 2 or 3 forward, boy, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, the juice is actually absolutely worth that squeeze, but you have to actually make that decision. It's a conscious choice.
I always like to wrap up with this question, Kyle, although you may have just answered it for us.
Yeah.
But if you could go back to Kyle, who I think you said was 25, 26, and suddenly you're managing all these people and the imposter syndrome setting in and all those things are happening, what is the one piece of advice, if you could go back in time, pick your time machine, go back, what's the one thing you would tell him that would help him carry the burden a little bit easier?
My 20-year-old self would have heard this podcast of me saying that and rolled my eyes. As cliche as it sounds, and as much as I might date myself, there is some wisdom that comes with experience. I think it's a younger leader's job to lean into that wisdom from those that have been there, done that, and kind of can help them navigate this thing called corporate America. But my answer is my answer, and that is be you. Be yourself. Yeah. Be your authentic self, warts and all. And again, not naive to the fact that that's not always embraced, and you might find yourself in a situation that says, I got to go do something else. But when you are in an environment that embraces who you are, warts and all, and the individual and unique ideas that you bring to the table, the experiences that you bring that are so different than the next person on the table, at the table, you can really unlock a connection with other people that you can't otherwise forge. And that is a genuine human connection to another person. If I'm not being authentically who I am filtering my words. I'm behaving in a way that's not consistent with who I am. Like if someone saw me outside of the office, they would go, who is that guy? Yeah. He behaves completely different than anyone. If you find yourself in that situation, that there is a shelf life to that. And I think at some point you wake up and you say, gosh, I really missed out on an opportunity not to grow my career, but to have an impact on others.
Love it. Kyle, this was a fantastic conversation. If people want to get your book or follow you or learn more about you, where are the best places for them to go to do that?
Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. As I mentioned, I was looking forward to joining you today. The book is Begin with We, 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. When I started to write the book, I told my wife, if I sell 1,000 copies, I'll be over the moon. We just passed 20,000 copies sold. It has been the trip of a lifetime for me. It's just been a really fun experience. So that's the book. My website and all of my social handles are the same. It's Kyle McDowell Inc. And a lot of people come on podcasts and say, you can find me on these platforms, and it's all these vanity metrics they're chasing. I share at Kyle McDowell Inc., whether it's Instagram or TikTok or even my LinkedIn presence, Kyle McDowell. I love to hear from those that are walking in the shoes that I've walked in, or perhaps they're exploring or debating taking on some type of role, or maybe they're just stuck. I love to hear from those types of folks. Not that I have all the answers. I have opinions on ways to kind of get through that situation, but I appreciate you giving the opportunity to share that because I love to hear from folks.
Absolutely. We'll drop links to all those in the show notes. Kyle, thank you for sharing the story of your executive evolution and all the insights that are going to help a lot of leaders grow in their careers. Thanks so much for being here today.
My pleasure, Craig. Thank you for having me.
Boy, I really enjoyed my time today with Kyle, running into somebody who has such a great view on leadership. We have a lot of similar ways we look at leadership, and I really enjoyed our time together today. As always, I like to give you my 3 key takeaways from the interview, and I focus on the areas of confidence, competence, and calm. In this episode, talking to Kyle, where I really saw this idea of competence is this idea about imposter syndrome. He talked a couple of times about how much he struggles with it. I struggled with it. Many leaders feel we're not as competent as people see us. And we really struggle. And we talked about being on 2 sides of a veil where we're struggling with imposter syndrome and the team thinks we know all the answers. The question I always like to come back to when I'm thinking about competence and talking to other leaders and coaching them about imposter syndrome is, what evidence do you have for the insecurity that you feel? And that's a great question that will help you build your confidence back when you're struggling with that issue. In the area of competence really begins to come when you know what your role is as a leader. Kyle and I talked about how the idea that your 2 jobs as a leader is to clear the deck for your team and help them develop and grow. And that really shows your confidence. When you are delving down into creating dozens of things that you have to report them on and a lot of minuscule data and things that are just making their lives a living hell that's not really raising any bars, it's just making you feel more comfortable, that's a non-confident leader. A confident leader knows their job is to clear the decks for their team and to help them grow as teammates. That's really the key. And that's when you know you've really got leadership confidence going with you. And then finally, the area of calm, that idea of being authentic with your team. When you are authentic with your team, you can be a lot more calm in your leadership style because you're really genuinely being you. You're not one person in front of the team, another person at home, another person in front of the execs in your organization. So being authentic allows you to be calm. I really appreciated Kyle's insights today and the stories of how his executive evolution came about and how he helps leaders evolve as well. As always, remember, you can go from being an accidental leader to the greatest of all time leaders. All it takes is developing your competence, confidence, and calm. See you next time on Executive Evolution.